Treasure by McSwigan, Chapter 15. The new snow was a sparkling white sheet that spread over everything. The windows of the houses had shaggy white eyebrows, and the doors were all but blocked up with dense woolly beards. The sunlight scattered handfuls of diamonds over the streets, and the yards were crystal prisms that showed every color of the rainbow where the sun touched the glittering white. Throughout Ryswick was a flurry of snow shoveling the day the blizzard subsided. It commenced from almost the earliest light. On the way to the cave, Peter found the snow knee-deep in places. He would sink into it, but his light sled rode on top, or would drop but a few inches below the crest. His team had the rare pleasure of making fresh footprints in the white world of the forest. Only the animals had preceded them, for Pargarson's skis cut across the hills where feet and sleds could not follow. So the new snow showed only the stars of small animal paws, and now and then a round spot where a rabbit may have sat on his haunches. After a time, Peter saw ski marks and noted that several pairs of snowshoes had traveled into the forest that morning. He had an uneasy feeling. The ski trail was not Pargarson's, for he would have come from an entirely different direction. Near the cave, he picked up another trail that seemed to come in a great loop from behind the evergreens at the cave entrance. Then further on, the loop sent out off a chute the way a branch grows out of a tree. Peter was cautious about approaching the cave. He was not going to walk into a trap. When he first came on the ski trail, he warned his team to silence, so the 10 of them moved over the snow as quietly as possible. Near the cave, he lined his boys and girls behind a thick clump of bushes that the new snow had made into a solid blot of white. Leaving them to guard his sled, he quietly followed the trail into the cave. He would not have been surprised to see gray-green Nazi uniforms inside, but instead there was only Pargarson wiping his forehead on his sleeve. Peter's stealthy approach was not lost on old Purr. "So you was frightened, eh? You think to come on the Germans? I should have told you it was only us. There are snowshoe trails, too, down the gully beyond the troll's tree. Nah, not to worry about them. Miles and Ole made them. 1 hour more, then there'll be trails all ways you can look, of snowshoes, of skis, of just plain feet. No one could find the way here by following the marks you boys and girls make with your boots and sleds." "Well, I didn't know," Peter said. "I knew you had come across the valley, but I didn't think 1 pair of skis could make so many trails, and I didn't know about the snowshoes." "I make the many ski trails myself. I make them more when you go off." Peter drew out a blue bandana handkerchief and wiped his running eyes. "You thought the Germans knew already about the cave? Not yet, but we must be careful or they'll learn." "So you and Ole and Miles are making a lot of trails they can't follow?" Peter had to admire the forethought behind this. "And why not? Without them, what could be easier than to know everything? As plain as the noses on their faces would be the way. From all the houses come footprints and sled marks. They all go to one place, to the woods. So if you're a German, what do? You follow the tracks and they lead you to a cave that is no cave at all. Only what was put here by someone with something to hide. Well, what is there to hide? Nothing but these brown bricks. And what are these bricks for? They're not to build a wall. One doesn't wrap such bricks in brown covers. And they're not for the fire. It takes only a minute to slit open the covers. And what do you find? Why, just plain gold. Gold enough to pave a street." It was a long speech for Pargarson, longer than any Peter had ever heard from him. Nor was that all of it, either. "And if you think we're going to let the Germans have this gold just by following the footprints, that goes straight as arrows. You're mistaken, Master Peter." What a vast amount of detail this undertaking required. Why, the grown-ups thought of everything. Peter could not help being impressed with the precautions that were being taken to prevent discovery. He felt that his safety and that of the children was being guarded to the utmost. He felt glad that he knew about this, but Pargarson did not allow him much time for reflection. "Where's your sled?" he asked sharply. Peter replied with a scurry through the door. "It's all right, kids," he called. "Come on and bring my sled." The storm hadn't destroyed the German barracks. This the children could see when they reached the lookout. Beaten by the wind and lashed by the sea, they still stood trim beside the fishing pier. One of the Nazis' warehouses had suffered some damage, for a crew of workers was busy repairing its roof. The fjord had been on a rampage because there was wreckage along its shore. But whether it was German or Norse property that had been carried away, the children couldn't tell. The Nazis didn't know what to make of the storm. Helga decided when her team reached the point where the beach lay spread before her. Peter's team was already there. His boys and girls had lunched and were about to start down the mountain to the Snake. They didn't know whether they'd be drowned like the people in the floods in the Bible, she said. They wouldn't have had time to build an ark. In any event, being housebound for 3 days hadn't improved the commandant's disposition. Peter could see that from where he was watching. The head officer was striding up and down before the barracks, hands behind his back. He would now and again lift a leather riding crop to shake it at someone who displeased him. Even up at the lookout, they could hear the snarl of his voice. He's telling them they are stupid as Norwegians. Helga had studied a little German and was translating for her team. He says that the people of this country have better sense than they, for they built their houses for the crazy wild weather in this part of the world. He must think we have blizzards like this all the time, Peter cut in. Helga went on. He says that if he'd been there when the barracks were started, they wouldn't have had all this trouble. I guess the storm did them more damage than we know, Peter concluded as he gathered his team together for the final push to the Snake. Down on the beach, Peter had his first brush with the commandant. Big boy like you playing with a sled? He taunted. In Germany, you'd be one of Hitler's youth. You'd learn to march. You'd be on your way to being a soldier. Don't want to learn to march. Don't want to be a soldier like you, Peter said under his breath. I could use a boy like you, the commandant went on, to polish my boots and bring me shaving water. What about it, boy? Would you like to come live here in the barracks? Peter, of course, made no reply. The commandant strode over and stood directly above him. Seated on his sled, he began to be afraid the officer would yank him up by his coat. Speak, boy. Are you dumb? But Peter had no word to say. He was not too frightened to speak, even if it was not forbidden. Dumb, stupid cattle, you Norwegians. The commandant turned on his heel. You deserve to lose your country. You're too brainless to defend it. But we'll put an end to this sled riding. There's no sense in a whole country going up in ignorance. On Monday, you go back to school.